More views and perspectives on this story. I'm now joined in the studio by my colleague and CGTN host, Liu Xin. She has spoken to locals in her in-depth special report, Lost in Hong Kong, when protests erupted in the city back in 2019. Xin, a pleasure to have you on China 24.
Thank you for the invitation.
I mean, you conducted extensive interviews in Hong Kong back in 2019, talking to people from all walks of life. When you reflect on that experience and on the accounts of the people you talked to back then, how does that help you understand the importance of this principle, Patriots Administering Hong Kong?
Well, I was in Hong Kong in November and December 2019 twice, and if you recall that period of time, it was after the worst was over, but the protests were still going on. There was still the standoff surrounding the Polytechnic University, and I was seeing a once very prosperous and lively city suffering, reeling from the disruptions and destructions that was brought on by the violent protesters and the perpetrators. So it was very sad, and it was a very, the memory was very vivid. I remember I was standing on the streets looking at the infrastructure, the entrance of metro stations being burned and still not repaired. Some pavement were merely plastered with cement so that people can walk on them, and graffiti everywhere and very nasty content on those graffitis. So, but people were trying to get on with their life, but in great chaos as well. So I think it is really about time that Hong Kong find stability and finds a sense of security, not just for its citizens' daily life, but for its political future as well. I think in answering the question of why it is important, why it is necessary for patriots to govern, to administer Hong Kong, I would say, what would be the consequence if patriots were not in control, not administering the city, or if the city fall into the hands of those who do not love China as a country, do not love Hong Kong as part of China? I think the answer is very, very clear. We have seen many protesters using violence, trying to achieve their political goals. Many people hijack the political process for their personal and political gains. People calling of Lam Chao, meaning perish together or mutually assured destruction. People who call for Hong Kong independence. People who call for foreign forces to intervene in Hong Kong, even foreign sanctions on China, on Chinese leaders in order to achieve their demands, political demands in Hong Kong. So I think the implication would be huge if Hong Kong is not in the hands of patriots.
I just want to press you on one particular group that you interviewed on that trip. I remember you having very candid conversations with some of the city's young people. Now, this was a very vocal group back then. It was also this group that exhibited violent behavior in some of the cases. When you look back on your conversations with them, why were they so political about the moves they carried out, and what was their demands? What did they want, and how will this new principle help to maybe bridge the gaps?
Well, I think the last question is a huge one, is exactly what a lot of people have been asking, have been trying to fix as well. But to go back to your previous questions as to what kind of influence these people were under, these young people were under, so that drive them to violence, to breaking the law in order to achieve their political aspiration. This was actually a very big issue on my mind when I went there, because even since the early days of the unrest in 2019, we know young people, sometimes high school students, were on the streets, were breaking laws. According to statistics from June 2019 to April 2020, about 8,000 arrests were made in Hong Kong, and 40% of these arrests were reported to be students, including university students and high school students. I remember I talked to a police officer called Alex, of course it's a pseudonym. He was cut in the neck by a 19-year-old protester, 19-year-old boy, and they were not in a confrontational situation. The police officer had his back to the young boy when he was attacked, and the boy cut the neck of the police officer with a knife. It was missing the artery very narrowly, but the police officer had to stay 4 hours in an operation in order to have his life saved. So it was a very severe crime that was committed by this young person. And I asked the police, I asked Ales, what did he think drove this young man to do such a heinous crime? He said he believed that the education system in Hong Kong went wrong, that many young people were under some kind of influence by certain people, which pushed them to do extreme things, which pushed them to take extreme actions. And I went to schools, I looked at textbooks, I go into bookstores to look at where people can buy textbooks, I talk to students, I talk even to a legislator who represent many teachers in Hong Kong and had conversation with him. And it was really a very big problem that education has not played a very constructive role in forming the minds of these young people. They definitely don't feel proud to be Chinese. They feel, okay, they are Hong Konger, but if you ask them whether you are Chinese, they have to think, and if you don't really press them, they probably prefer not to be. And I think that's a big problem.
Which is probably why there has been a lot of reflection on how we can change the education so that patriotism is at least an element in the textbooks. Xin, I want to also talk to you about the economic plan for Hong Kong. Hong Kong has a place in this new 5-year plan that was under discussion throughout the political season this year. The goal was to develop Hong Kong into an international hub of aviation, tech innovation, and cultural exchanges. Based on what you have told us just now and based on your experiences reporting in the city, what are your expectations for Hong Kong going forward after what we saw back in 2019?
I think for people to understand the importance of these 5-year plans, basically that's one reason why China is able to make all the difference compared to the Western electoral system, where every few years you have a new leadership and sometimes they reverse the plan of the previous administration, so things get disrupted. China does not have that disadvantage. So every time China makes a plan, it's a very strong indication of the kind of resources, the kind of policies that will go into realizing these plans. So the fact that Hong Kong has been given such a blueprint, I think it's a great opportunity. That means from national level to the local level to the areas around Hong Kong, policies and resources will be pivoted towards Hong Kong to achieve these goals. And I think that's a great opportunity. But on the other hand, Hong Kong people also need to be aware that this is not something they can take for granted. They need to grasp this opportunity, and for that to happen, stability needs to be there, right? The security of the political arrangement for Hong Kong needs to be there. By that I mean Hong Kong will be able to exercise to the full extent of the two systems if the one country part is fully cemented. And I think this latest development in fixing the loopholes in the electoral system has great potential towards achieving that future.
And we believe you'll continue to report on that as well going forward. Xin, we appreciate your perspectives here. Thank you so much for joining us today.